The most viewed League of Legends video on my channel at the time I'm writing this is the one on Overpowered Abilities, where I talked about individual skills in the game that are, as you can guess, overpowered, either because they provide too much benefit relative to the ease of use, such as Yona's Soul Unbound, or they utilize a mechanic in League that offers little to no room for counterplay, or even invalidates entire classes of champions, like Akali's Twilight Shroud. I thought to revisit individual abilities again, as I think there's a lot of potential for exploration with this topic, namely because the experiences we as the players have, more specifically the negative ones, are largely influenced by one aspect of a champion, not the entirety of them. For instance, why do a lot of AD carry mains dislike Jax? It's because of Counter-Strike. For up to 2 seconds your basic attacks do nothing to him and then he stuns you right after. Jax's other 4 abilities are not that bad, but Counter-Strike single-handedly affects how you have to approach him in a fight. As a continuation of this, let's go ahead and talk about a different category of abilities. Last time we talked about empowered ones, now let's talk about badly designed ones. And just in case you're unsure as to what separates the two, an overpowered ability may not always be badly designed in concept, and a badly designed ability may not always be overpowered in concept, although you can interchange the two. Also, just for the sake of avoiding redundancy, any ability I talked about in that episode will not be mentioned in this one. As you can tell by the thumbnail, I have included some new ones. So in light of the subjectivity of this video, I want to thoroughly explain how I view an ability as badly designed. As I mentioned earlier, most of the time the community dislikes a champion not for the sum total of their kit, but rather a singular aspect of it that just so happens to be extremely frustrating to deal with. By consequence, that poses the question of if an ability's quality of design is judged by the experience in going against it, or if it depends on another matter entirely. While there is that to consider, we can look at this from a few other angles, one of which is the allocation of a champion's power budget. I brought this term up a couple times in the past but haven't properly explained what it means. Power budget is not an established constant. It's an undetermined theoretical quantity of power and resources that is spread across their passive, Q, W, E, and ultimate. Once again, there is no actual hard number or standard, it's just a way to make it easier to gauge how much of a champion's strength is in which abilities. After all, I highly doubt someone like Singed has the same amount of stuff as Yone. Just in case you're still confused, let's use Taric as an example. One problem affecting his balance is of course his incredible ultimate, the only one in the game to grant unconditional invulnerability to multiple allies after a delay. I don't think I need to explain why being immune to any and all damage for 2.5 seconds can be game-changing if used correctly. Due to this, the rest of Taric's abilities have to deliberately be kept weaker on an individual level. Starlet's touch heals for very little unless you have all 5 charges, especially considering the exorbitant mana cost. Dazzle is a pretty effective stun, but when you compare it to someone like Rel's Crashdown, it's nowhere near the same effective oomph. Much of Taric's power budget is allocated to his ultimate, which is why very few people play him, since betting all of your combat pressure on one ability that has hundreds of ways to fail isn't exactly a good thing. Some abilities are badly designed if their power budget is disproportionately skewed towards them to the detriment of the rest, and many champions struggle with this issue, some of whom I'll be getting into later on. One other way you can look at an ability being badly designed is by looking at the clarity of its impact. In user experience, one metric that's been heavily valued is the clarity of things. It's one of the reasons why people have been complaining about new skins, because sometimes it's really hard to tell what champion you're going up against. As seen in Storm Dragon Lee Sin, his movements, look, and animations don't really feel or look like original Lee Sin. This can even translate to abilities. It's why ultimates look super flashy because they're supposed to be a champion's ace move. If the animation or visual look of an ability looks ambiguous or inconspicuous, that's grounds for bad design as well. There are probably other ways you can look at it, but in my opinion, those are like the 3 big ones. Anyway, I have 5 in particular I want to show you today, and if it wasn't evident by the thumbnail, you already know which ones I want to discuss, so let's get to it. Starting right at the very center, let's talk about Mordekaiser's Death Realm. I wanted to talk about this ability for a long time. Before I explain, please kindly watch this clip.
He's over there! Bro! He's right there! It's bugged! Dude, what the f? Oh my god! First time I touched this piece of champion in a year, and holy what the man?
It's by far one of the most terribly designed abilities in the game. In my retrospective video on him, I remember talking about how practically speaking it has its uses. One of the prevailing weaknesses of Juggernauts is how easy it is to kite them, and Death Realm can give Mordekaiser a way to severely limit his target's movement options, but the way it does so is not good at all. For one, Mordekaiser's Death Realm effectively throws all semblance of strategy or mechanics out the window. As we already know, he's a stat checker. Sure, you can dodge his Q and E, but most of the time his passive and auto attacks do enough damage to chunk you to pieces anyway. And if you harbor any illusion of trying to beat him, you have to go through a massive shield on top of his high durability thanks to the items he purchases. Compounding that with him stealing 10% of your health, attack damage, ability power, armor, and magic resistant attack speed, and there's very few champions, if any, who can face him head on. So most of the time they try to avoid him for 7 seconds in the hopes they can make it out alive. As Mordekaiser, it's in your best interest to zap away the highest priority target on the enemy team, which is usually the AD carry. ADCs derive much of their safety from their support, and unless your name is Vayne, you have a snowball's chance in hell of being able to 1v1 Mordekaiser, I don't care who you are. Basically, there's nothing you can do except pick a god and pray that the Death Realm will open where there's a wall that you can dash over since Mord has no mobility, or you're almost invariably screwed. It's not just a negative experience for his opponent, but also him. Quicksilver Sash allows you to break out of his ultimate with the press of a button. That's it. Now you might say you can QSS other people's suppress, so it's the same thing. Not true. Remember, every other suppression or hard major CC ability like Ash Arrow or Annie's Tibbers has something else attached to it. Damage. Even if you cleanse Malzalt, you're still taking a face full of damage, it just removes the lockdown. For Mordekaiser, his ultimate doesn't actually deal damage to you. If we're talking about it from a technical standpoint, it reduces your maximum health by 10% and then heals Mordekaiser for 10% of your original total health. In other words, if you QSS Death Realm, it completely reverses everything. It would be one thing if your stats were still lowered for 7 seconds, but no, a 1300 gold item removes his most powerful ability from the game. Here's the problem though, Mordekaiser's Death Realm is the driving factor behind all of his recent buffs. Have you guys noticed over the past year or so he keeps getting tiny buffs here and there? Ever since patch 10.1 where he lost 1 second and 6% movement speed on his passive, he has gotten 7 consecutive buffs to his basic abilities. Less cooldown here, more damage there, stronger shields, and so on. Yet despite that, he's still not improving in win rate, still hard stuck 47-48% diamond plus. That's because Realm of Death completely throws off his balance. Riot cannot make any adjustments to his ultimate because it's overpowered yet terrible at the same time. You can't escape Death Realm through normal means, but it's big enough to where you can realistically run around trying to avoid him because he's slower than Patrick's pet rock. The normal response would be to make the arena smaller, right? But then that turns it into an instant point-and-click death because 99% of champions can't fight him 1v1, especially when he steals 10% of all their stats, which is a lot by the way. It's not only frustrating to go up against and even use yourself, but it's causing a huge balance problem with Mordekaiser because all the buffs Riot keeps giving him only affect his laning phase, which is already very strong. Yet he can't win games because he's worthless in the mid game against any ranged champion if he misses his pull, with his only saving grace being Death Realm, which makes for a very unhealthy interaction. It's one of the most polarizing abilities in the entire game. Death Realm either hard wins you the game or you don't have an ultimate, there's no in between. Okay, moving on. Sorry, I spent a little too much time on Mordekaiser. I promise the remaining 4 won't be nearly as long. Yumi's W has to go on this list next. I talked about this many times before, but for continuity's sake, it has to be in this video. You and Me, that's actually the name of the W, inherently isn't a very crazy ability. It doesn't cause a mountain of interaction problems, nor does it ruin her power budget. Yumi simply anchors herself onto an allied champion and gains bonus ability power or attack damage based on her anchor's dominating stat while providing the same boost to them. That's about it. Where this is a problem is that it fundamentally breaks the Enchanter's support gameplay dynamics she should be dealing with. People like to make fun of Enchanter supports by saying they take no skill or haha e-girl getting carried, but Enchanter supports are actually harder to play than a lot of tank supports. Enchanters can provide a lot of defensive and augmentative value to their teammates, heals, shields, buffs, and occasionally crowd control, but to do so, they have to be close to the player they're trying to support. And unlike tanks, Enchanters are really easy to take down, much easier than even their AD carries, as they typically have low defense and health. Positioning in fights and skirmishes is critical for Enchanters to do well. There is definitely a huge difference between a good Janna or Lulu versus a bad one, trust me. Yumi does not have this issue, or at least nowhere to the same extent. While attached, she remains untargetable indefinitely, so unless her companion dies, she is immune to any and all hostile interactions, meaning she can get her abilities off with no consequence, provided of course she doesn't detach herself. Yes, I'm aware if she's grounded or locked down with hard crowd control, she cannot attach to an ally for 5 seconds, and that until level 11, if she detaches, she cannot reattach immediately. But the only incentive to do so is to activate her passive Bop and Block, which in most cases is not necessary except for during the neutral game. Comparing her few seconds of vulnerability to every other enchanter support being permanently exposed, you can't even make that comparison. I mean, right now every pro player is complaining on Twitter about how unfair she is in Worlds 2021, so if the entire community clamoring for her to get deleted like 5 years ago wasn't enough, that should be enough explanation right there. It is such an innocuous ability for how much it actually does for her. Next one I want to talk about is Alpha Strike, Master Yi's signature ability, a point-and-click dash that renders him untargetable for a little over 1 second while continuously dealing damage to up to 4 enemies before reappearing in front of the target he initially struck. That's a mouthful. Despite being a very old ability, Alpha Strike's notoriety precedes it. The damage is obviously not the problem. It's a lot, but it's also his only damaging ability, so that's fine. However, being able to both gap close on your target while dodging attacks is a lot of power to pack into one skill. When it comes to untargetability, it's balanced in that any ability with it usually has a long cooldown. Alpha Strike at a glance does reflect this, 16 seconds at max rank, except it has 2 ways to artificially reduce said cooldown. Each basic attack on hit reduces its current cooldown by 1 second, and thanks to his ultimate Highlander passive, scoring takedowns refund 70% of the cooldown on his Q, W, and E, which makes Alpha Strike extremely spammable in the right conditions. He can use it 3, 4, even 5 times in one single fight. No one can come close to the length of untargetability that Master Yi can. I do concede that he's an assassin, but he's been a design problem for as long as we can remember. Interestingly enough, Alpha Strike used to be his ultimate way back in like I think beta or alpha version of the game, which I find kind of curious because that would theoretically make it more balanced. If its cooldown was like 60 seconds then it would make more sense. Even if you were to keep the 1 second on hit reduction or the 70% refund on takedown, there would still at least be a good 5 to 6 second window where you could still do damage to him, rather than mashing the hell out of Q and blinking everywhere so you can't do anything. But as it stands, Alpha Strike is a very unhealthy ability. I don't think I've met a single person who genuinely thinks Alpha Strike is a fine ability. This one might be a bit controversial, might just be personal bias, I'm not sure, but I wanted to put Fiora's duelist stance for one reason and one reason only: percent max health true damage. It is the only form of damage that you cannot itemize against. True damage cuts through any armor and magic resist you might have, as well as percent damage reduction, such as Warwick's E. Ordinarily, you would want to itemize health to deal with that since it's the remaining defensive parameter. I mean, technically health works against physical and magic damage too, but you get what I mean. But if you were to factor in percent max health true damage, it doesn't matter how squishy or how tanky you are, you will lose a set chunk of your health no matter what. I can understand the reason for giving her that kind of privilege. Fiora's passive requires her to strike her target from a certain cardinal direction, north, south, east, and west, and given the need to concentrate on her position relative to you, it's not completely unreasonable. Except that it totally freaking is. There's only 2 champions in the entire game who do percent max health true damage, Vayne and Fiora, but they're far from equally made. What keeps Vayne's Silver Bolts in check are 2 things. 1, she can only apply Silver Bolts to 1 target at a time, and 2, she has to strike that target 3 times, not factoring in Guinsoo's Rage Blade. Fiora, on the other hand, can place a vital on each champion within range and sight of her, not to mention her ultimate, which immediately highlights all 4 vitals. Furthermore, Vayne's true damage does not scale while Fiora's does. In the late game, her passive can do something like 20% max health true damage per vital, implying she can 100 to 0 any champion in 5 hits, doesn't matter if you're a Yumi or a 10,000 HP Cho'Gath. It also doesn't matter that it's based on position when you take into account the massive movement speed boost she gets upon striking a vital, which subsequently makes it easier for her to strike more. Ever since Goredrinker and Strikebreaker came out, there have been videos of players on the Chinese server managing to proc grand challenges for vitals in less than 1 second. By virtue of this, she practically outscales everyone in the game except maybe Tryndamere because he has death immunity. Percent max health true damage of that magnitude and ease of access should not exist, not without heavy restrictions, none of which are present in her kit. And for the 5th and final ability, I chose Karthus' Requiem, a very elementary ability. Press a button and in 3 seconds everyone on the enemy team takes huge magic damage. That's it, that's literally all it does. And in my opinion, it's one of the laziest ultimates to ever exist. Similarly to Mordekaiser, I guess there's a running theme with Shadow Isles, Karthus' ultimate is where much of his power budget is locked behind. Not saying his basic abilities are bad or anything, it's just that he has a super ultimate like Fiddlesticks, Malphite Cannon, and whatnot. I generally am not a fan of things that give you advantage just by existing. Requiem has a channel time of 3 seconds, arguably the longest channel time for an ability that doesn't grant immediate effects. However, given that he can cast this from anywhere on the map and it will automatically lock onto everyone on the team, is not only lazy but kind of unfair. Global ultimates are balanced by the player's ability to position them correctly. Gangplank's Cannon Barrage is another global ultimate with devastating power, but it's position dependent. And let us not forget the 80 carry global ults, Draven, Senna, Jinx, Ashe, and Ezreal. Once again, position dependent, you gotta aim them. Then there's Karthus. Yeah, let's just simultaneously blast everyone on the enemy team, no positioning or aiming required. Now before you go into the comments talking about how Soraka's Wish does the same thing but to her allies, I never said that ability was very good either. In fact, I was thinking about putting it on this list after they made it remove grievous wounds, but it would be here for the same reasons as Requiem. By the way, I am aware that a double damage Q at max rank ironically does more damage than a rank 1 ultimate, but it's not the value, it's the principle. Abilities like that are a product of old game design and really should be reworked. Similarly to overpowered abilities, what is considered bad design differs from person to person. What I see as a badly designed ability you guys might not, and vice versa. Some of you might think, I don't know, Yasuo ultimate is bad design while I think it's okay. So let me know your own top 5 badly designed abilities down in the comments. Again, there were plenty of other candidates I could have put on here, but for the sake of time I narrowed it down to 5. It was also whatever I could think of at the time I asked Jake to make the thumbnail for me, so in hindsight, I might have swapped out Fiora passive with something else. It's all in good fun though, I enjoy complaining about this game, as I'm sure many of you do. If you enjoyed the video though, please be sure to leave a like, it helps the channel a whole bunch. Don't forget to sub to the channel for more content like this. Consider following me on Twitter and joining my Discord server if you haven't yet. And lastly, check out my previous discussion videos, including the overpowered abilities if you have yet to watch it. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.